Go.
Can we start?
Yes, you may.
Welcome everybody to this session. I'm very pleased to introduce my friends from the Institute of Constructivist Psychology in Padua, in Italy, Massimo Giliberto and Chiara Lui and Francesco Del Rizzo. They are a wonderful school to go and visit. I must have taught with you a few times over the years. Massimo, can you remember when I first came over?
Yes, I remember well.
You don't remember which year?
Which year? Maybe 2014.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, let me just say briefly that these folk are very productive. Massimo has got a particular interest in ethics and cultural matters. Those entertaining papers that you wrote with the late Trevor Butt and with Viv Burr on walking like an Italian and looking at intercultural issues. You've looked at the identity profiles of people who work with refugees and burnout in those people, and working with adolescents and prisoners, and generally things about PCP teaching and many more things. Francesca has written on such topics as forgiveness and again about teaching constructivist psychology, using sport and horse riding in particular as therapeutic tools. You've worked with, you've done research on aphasia and oncology. And Chiara Lui has worked with children and looked at child language and play and working with adolescents. And Chiara and Massimo are now editors of the Rivista Italiana di Costruttivismo, as well as maybe I think the journal that Jörn was editing before. Yes, the Personal Construct Theory in Practice. Who's editing that one now, Jörn?
Yes, right.
Who's the editor now? Is it Viv and you? Yeah, I thought maybe maybe Chiara was doing that, but I'm probably getting confused.
With
Anyway.
Jörn, Massimo and Viv, I'm managing the editing.
Yeah. So anyway, I won't waffle on any longer. So let me turn over to you three.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Massimo Giliberto. I'm the director of the ICP School of Psychotherapy in Padua. I only have one request. Since not all of us are English natural speakers, I ask you to speak slowly. Of course, all accents are welcome, even the Italian accent. And let language be a communication channel and not a barrier. Okay, I think that Chiara can introduce us to the structure of this workshop.
Yes, yes. Yes, thank you, Massimo. Thank you, Ari, for your nice introduction. And thank you to all the committee members of this constructivist meetup. Before we start, I'd like to give you some information about the structure of the workshop. There will be a first part of a presentation led by Massimo and Francesca. And in the second part, we'll have the opportunity to work in groups. The breakout rooms will be composed by 5 or 6 people at least. If we are enough, I don't think so, but if we are enough people to constitute groups based on language, we will be happy to give you the opportunity to converse in your own language with colleagues. Or if you prefer, you can choose to work in English in an international breakout room. So please let us know your choice in the chat facilities, writing if you'd like to work in your own language if possible, or in English in an international group. And we'll try, thanks to Jeanette, to arrange the breakout rooms following your preferences as much as possible. So if there are no questions, I give the microphone to Massimo.
Thanks. I will show you PowerPoint. Just a moment. I wish to emphasize a few words, which will be thread of our discourse: word, power, uncertainty, and doubt. Words are blood. This is what an Italian great writer, Cesare Pavese, once wrote. What does it mean? We could say that words dress our meanings, our constructs. Anyway, this might be insufficient, not enough. Words are alive. They are not a simple representation of the word, but they are part of the word, as Varela suggested, a form of embodied knowledge. Words are actions. Words are dispersed signals of our existence, which we discover in the voice of a friend between the pages of a book, recited by our various selves, embedded in the groove between the joy and the pain. Into the words, but not just into the words. We seek and sometimes we find ourselves. Words often break the shell of our loneliness. Words become tribe and become history, composing themselves in a speech, in an explanation, in a narration, and in an uncertain promise. That is what we anticipate. In terms of PCP, words are part of the family of devices which a person invents in order to achieve a purpose. Channels established as means to ends. That is what Kelly wrote, explaining the notion of ways in his fundamental postulate. So playing with the postulate, paraphrasing Miller-Meyer, we can also say, a person's processes are psychologically channelized also by the words with which he anticipates events. Well, words, also intended as a narrative, are ways in which we, anticipating events, create worlds in which we participate. Moreover, words meet in assembly, articulating themselves in a shared language, a language that brings a community together and that creates bridges between people, bridges that we cross simultaneously in one direction and another, always in the midst, as Miller-Meyer wrote, of telling and listening. In short, we cannot do without the words. Narrating ourselves, telling the things of our life, gives us the ability to face them, to give them a meaning. And often, in order to narrate our stories, we use metaphors, which are a powerful device to elaborate our experience, going beyond mere descriptiveness. After all, I myself am using a metaphorical language. We can say without saying too much, but at the same time, in this looseness, we can convey many meanings. Exactly for this reason, unfortunately, a metaphor can be a powerful means of manipulation. Regarding our pandemic situation, Sabrina Cipolletta and Cristina Orto have recently identified a certain number of metaphors. One, the word metaphor. Two, the metaphor of punishment for having maltreated nature. Three, conspiracies, hypotheses. And four, the hypothesis of COVID as an opportunity of change. But as the principle of the constructive alternativism suggests us, many other metaphors are possible. In the ICP school, for example, the students and I conducted a small experiment, narrating the pandemic situation, both with a war and a journey metaphor, in order to explore what kind of experience, limits, and possibilities, respectively, they entail. Together, we felt in our skins the transformative power of these metaphors. For instance, Matteo tells us a war story full of anxiety and threat. Now it is official. It is a war, but this time the enemy is invisible. We don't know what we're up against. It's a new form of battle. We don't know what to expect. We have no weapons to defend ourselves. People die everywhere. The enemy makes no difference. It kills indifferently. Adventure, hope, desire for discovery, and at the same time, fear and acceptance for what cannot be controlled appear in the journey metaphor of Matteo himself. Sorry. We sailed from a safe and known port to an unknown destination. The fleet has dispersed in the sea in tempest. We cross deep water. We try to avoid shoals. We hope for a good wind in our sails. We are going with the flow. We don't force the tiller because it might break. We yell to flow and we will arrive at our destination. All these metaphors channelize processes and emotions, construing, we can say, different worlds. So what use has been made of it by social media and politicians, and with what implications? We'll see later. Without doubt, the pandemic has broken into our lives, carrying with it the weight of uncertainty. It is a crisis, something that the present generation have not experienced before. An unexpected wound threatening our sense of safety, our sense of untouchability, as had already happened in the pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu. This crisis will affect the world by changing it. This virus is not just a tiny speck, but it is also a disruptive force in the domain of the social, psychological, and cultural. Winter and Reed explored well people's and governments' responses and transitions in PCP terms. If I had to summarize from my point of view, what has fundamentally changed, which is the fracture we must face, not just individual, but also collective, I guess that our illusion of control has collapsed. Even science has publicly showed its human face. The numerous hypotheses of the experts, often contradictory to each other, have revealed that the scientific enterprise is not that of control, but more humanly, more nobly, more honestly, the attempt to govern the imponderable, an uncertainty deeply rooted in the fabric of our lives. In the face of this uncertainty, we are between the need to hold on to something that does not change and the evidence of change and uncertainty. Politicians and social discourses seems to oscillate between these two poles, certainty or uncertainty, that is to say, in other words, security or adventure. Kelly himself identified these two fundamental and superordinate choices. In this COVID time, narrations and metaphors have been placed along the line, joining these two poles of this really superordinate construct. And the words we use to tell stories, but also to create and transform our experiences, are playing a crucial role, sometimes being emptied or manipulated. Words are an instrument of power. Think of the distorted and manipulated use of the words freedom and democracy to say everything and the opposite of everything. For example, the word freedom has been used in order to leave thousands of immigrants to die in the Mediterranean Sea because they have been described as invaders, a threat for our population. The word democracy, at the same time, has also been used to reclaim the right to incite racial hatred. If a word is used to say at the same time two opposite things, that term no longer means anything. It was stolen and emptied. Words shape our doubts, our questions, and our certainties. Words dress our constructs, our actions. Words imprison us in the illusion of certainty and control, or otherwise, invite us to explore, to actively accept the uncertainty and complexity of the world. Francesca will show you some examples.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Francesca.
I will show something. Just a moment. I don't find. Okay. Okay. Here we are. Okay. Words are an instrument of power, Massimo told us. We may also say that power uses words to legitimate and maintain itself. Viktor Klemperer's fundamental book, The Language of the Third Reich, is perhaps one of the most touching testimonies of this phenomenon. Whatever that people are determined to hide, be it only from others or from themselves, even things they carry around unconsciously, language reveals all. And he also wrote, no, the most powerful influence was exerted neither by individual speeches nor by articles or flyers, posters or flags. It was not achieved by things which one has to absorb by conscious thought or conscious emotions. Instead, Nazism permeated the flesh and blood of the people through single words, idioms, and sentence structures which were imposed on them in a million repetitions and taken on board mechanically and unconsciously. In the internet age, words are repeated thanks to social networks and in particular thanks to memes. What is a meme? Here we have a definition, but also two possible examples and one more. So I decided to analyze the political communication about COVID using memes. I collected some used in some of the official party pages on Facebook, and namely 3 political parties, Lega Nord and Forza Italia, that are opposition parties, and Partito Democratico, that is a governmental party. They can allow us to understand how the parties have faced the threat and anxiety transitions favored by COVID. Then I will try to use PCP professional constructs to purge the possible constructs and their concrete implications, since, as Massimo said before, words are actions. Mine would be only some examples. They don't want to be more than an opportunity to reflect together. We will start with the memes of Lega Nord, an opposition party. On the right, the Italian version. No, on the left, the Italian version, and on the right, the traduction. The first one is this, and two linked constructs immediately emerge: rights versus prohibitions, and immigrants versus Italians. It is not at all said what rights are spoken about, moreover sacrosanct, and what is implied is that there are no prohibitions for immigrants. It is taken for granted that the strangers disembarking are immigrants. This means that as they do not respect the rules on immigration, they do not respect the rules on social distancing, and so they do not respect any kind of rule. We is used to soliciting identification, presumably with the Italians who are forced to close. We, therefore, opposes immigrants and are not expressed they. The submerged pole of we are forced is probably something like choice. The subtext can be, if the government would not oblige to close pubs, restaurants, and so on, we would keep them open regardless of the usefulness or danger of this decision. Through this focus on imposition, it is suggested that the government is not a democracy, but an authoritarian regime in connection with prohibitions. It is said, forced to close, but close what? There is no reference to what is really closed, nor to the reasons of the decision to close and to its usefulness. The last words are government incapable. Putting together what it is said before, the conclusion is that the government is to blame for the arrival of the immigrants and for the fact that we are forced to close. Coronavirus is never mentioned, presumably because the mere mention of it would prompt in those who read the activation of a mechanism of self-protection that would be sufficient to justify, at least partially, the closures. Besides, once appointed, the coronavirus would lend itself to be read as the responsible for the situation of hardship that the country lives, and therefore the government would no longer be seen as guilty of it. The second one. On the top, we have the pictures of the ministries and the immigrants on the bottom. Again, closure is seen as a source of abuse of power. Africa is interesting beyond the quantitative hyperbole because illegal immigrants are identified to occur with the African continent, and this, as we know, is a falsehood. A part of immigration comes from Asia, but evidently it is not so threatening. What is suggesting without being explicitly said? I hypothesize something as Italians are treated badly versus illegal immigrants that are welcomed. Italians are not free, illegal immigrants are free. They, the subject of those two sentences, is implicitly opposed to us. The ones who welcome immigrants are the ones who close. They are those who stand against us, who limit our freedom. The third, here the picture is of the former Prime Minister and his spokesman. And here, the idea is that Italy is not any longer a democracy, but a monarchy empire, where only two people decide on the heads of their subjects. Again, we find the idea of an abuse of power, a loss of democracy, of freedom. the last one. Here the pictures are of the 4 leaders of the governmental parties. And this meme, to me, is extremely interesting because in it, there is the identification of the government with the evil of Italy. In Italian, the word male has not only the meaning of evil, but also of pain. We say ho male to mean it hurts me. And of disease. For example, cancer is called il brutto male, and we say mal di testa to mean headache. At this time, talking about evil male means talking about COVID. That here it is not mentioned, but only evoked as always. And it is suggested that the real disease of the country, what is destroying its economic structure, is the government, not the pandemic that has affected it. My little conclusions. If citizens can feel mainly anxiety and threat in the face of the pandemic, Lega chooses not to deal with these transitions, but promotes anger. So the reader can constrict on unpleasant sensations of uncertainty and dangerous change, and focus on someone to blame for everything. The metaphor chosen to tell what is happening is that of the war. The government, author of the restrictions on the opening of shops and premises, is identified as the enemy to fight. Coronavirus vanishes from the landscape, and with it, the reasons that motivate the government's restrictive choices. All this favors an attitude of non-adherence to the rules designed by the technicians to lower the risk of contagion, cause divisions and laceration in the country, and it does not outline solutions to the present problems. So now we look at Forza Italia, another opposition party, very different from Lega. In this meme, the virus is named. In fact, it almost seems that it is the title of the meme, as if to say that everything that follows must be read within this context. In an individualist perspective, Forza Italia is a liberal party in the center-right. The focus is on the contribution of each, as to call each citizen to his personal responsibility. The finale, in which the idea of us is emphasized with the repetition of the possessive adjective ours, opens to an us that seems inclusive of all versus opposed to any you or them. In this meme, it appears that the antagonist is coronavirus. No metaphor is made explicit, although the structure of the chosen narrative could recall the classical structure of fairy tales in which the hero who tries to realize his dream or project is opposed to an antagonist who tries to destroy it. Only by overcoming the trials that the antagonist submits, the hero can achieve happiness. The verbs are to the future, to indicate a perspective, to outline a hope of improvement. It is in fact established a sort of rule, if, then, that provides anticipations to the future, as if in a scenario of a profound change and in a condition of difficult anticipation, the party wanted to try to tighten and force on a minimum of anticipation possible. The verbs that make up the two hearts of the period are do, go back to live, and resume. I believe that the focus on doing can encourage an aggressive attitude. People feel so invited to contribute, each for their part, and the contribution of each is important and significant. Again, I hypothesized that the phrase do our part implicitly refers to the provisions of the government, which are not criticized, but, on the contrary, which seems to be invited to join. There is no mention of the present, which appears to be one of the submerged poles of the meme, present in which it seems that we cannot live and exercise our activities due, as is implied, to the coronavirus. The second, again, the title is coronavirus. Again, naming the virus from the beginning creates a background within which everything that follows must be placed. By stating that the economy cannot go into quarantine, the meme recalls the quarantine in which people are forced. It is as if it were suggested that people can go into quarantine, but the economy can't. It is, of course, a statement that is perfectly consistent with the political theory of the party, which sees the economy as the center of interest and social life, the engine of every significant phenomenon. It's obviously a critical statement to the government, which is implicitly accused of quarantining the economy. The criticism, however, is not aggressive, and the use of modal can gives the message the value of an exhortation to remove the economy from quarantine rather than a negative judgment, as if to say, although government measures are right, we invite it to consider that it is not possible to treat the economy and people in the same way. So my conclusions. Faced with the anxiety and threat felt by the citizens, Forza Italia seems to make an attempt to restore a minimum of meaning by constricting on doing in a utilitarian perspective and thus re-establishing a minimum of anticipation. In this way, it fosters a transition of aggression. People can feel motivated to engage in everyday life, to find solutions to problems and to adhere to the rules of prevention of contagion. This individualistic and utilitarian perspective, which has the advantage, in fact, of calling everyone to their own responsibility, could have the limit of neglecting the ethical and moral meaning of the decision taken at the governmental level. The last party, Partito Democratico, PD, a governmental party. Consistent with its left-wing party nature, PD focuses on a collective versus individual dimension. The individual pole, however, is not explicit. It is preferred to indicate loosely any other interest, probably to indicate a possible multiplicity of contrasting poles, collective interest versus individual, collective interest versus interest of part, and so on. The word interest is repeated twice to suggest that the measures implemented by the government of which the PD is a party, measures that constitute one of the implicit backgrounds of this meme, are put in place for the interest of all, interest to which implicitly, it is suggested, other political parties would allow other type of interest to prevail. The first sentence is a sort of moral imperative. Must be put is a rule, truth, that cannot and must not be discussed. In our terms, we could use the term preemptive to indicate this construction. Preemptiveness that is reinforced by the use of always at the end of the sentence, whose value is increased by the pause created by the comma. It seems that the party wants, through the affirmation of this congresswoman, to legitimize its choices by appealing to a sort of abstract and indisputable moral law, rather than to concrete and utilitarian consideration. The second one. In this meme is recalled the metaphor of war. The enemy is the coronavirus versus the rules to fight it. What is the background to the meme is the widespread impatience with the rules established by the government to prevent infections. The implication is that if you adhere to the metaphor of war, you respect the rules because they are the weapons available to fight the virus. This formulation, so preemptive, does not take into account that the rules useful to fight the virus also have negative consequences in many people's lives. These are economic, relational, and emotional consequences that can cause very high levels of suffering. This constriction, namely not to take into account the growing unease in the country, can make many people feel not understood and unheard. This invalidation of some core role constructs, being understood, being heard, being considered, and of dependency constructs, my government takes care of me and of my needs, can foster a transition of anger, and the government can be seen as responsible for discomfort and suffering. In this way, the metaphor of war evoked in the meme can be overturned. The government can be considered as the enemy, and adherence to the rules established by it can be constructed as a way to arm oneself. And the last one, I trust doctor and science. In a moment of difficulty, even for science, it is facing a new phenomenon, an unknown pathology, and so is not able to give immediate solution and cure. The party declares its trust in both doctors and science itself. The background of this meme is a widespread distrust of science and doctors, both in terms of the effectiveness of treatment and in terms of vaccines. I wonder if this meme somehow responds to the meme of the Lega, in which the image of Salvini, the leader of the party, is accompanied by the phrase, I trust him. Saying that I trust him, I am implying that I don't trust anyone else. Faced with a fideistic statement, the PD opposes one another. If so, the risk for this meme is to get out of the realm of rational science to enter an irrational field, faith, very different. In it, the believer is not required to think and reflect, but to rely on something or someone and let them do. My conclusions. Faced with people's anxiety and threat, PD seems to be constricting on adherence to the rules that must be respected for moral reasons. This is done because it is right to do so. It seems to me that this is an attempt at reassurance, as Kelly says. Reassurance is a simplified superordinate construction placed upon the clinical situation. It is communicated to the client so that his behavior and ideas will temporarily appear to him to be consistent, acceptable, and organized. It is never more than a temporary expedient. The therapist should never use it in an attempt to bring about far-reaching results. Yet, it does have its place in therapy, just as a sedative has its place in medical practice. In addition, the phrases contained in many memes have preemptive formulations that seem to exclude the possibility of other views. As already pointed out, this constriction can invalidate the core role constructions and dependence constructions of citizens. The party seems to take a top-down position. It knows what is right and wrong, who is the enemy and who is the ally, who should be trusted and who not. There is no attempt to promote aggression or to provide useful information to understand what is happening and the reasons for even difficult decisions. The implications of these communicative choices are adherence to the rules in those who have similar superordinate constructions based on the right versus wrong construct in a moral sense, on the fight against coronavirus and on trust in science, and rebellion, in whom instead, as different superordinate constructions, does not feel respected and considered, but forced to a position of obedience. And this is these are my examples for an application of PCP to the analysis of political communication, even in this time.
Thank you, Francesca.
Thank you to Massimo and Francesca for these clear examples of, I think, how powerful can be PCT and the fundamental notion of construct to read the dimension of meanings we are immersed in. So now we can do another step of exploration. I share a slide, just a moment. Because in a few minutes, we will be assigned into breakout rooms. Okay. Can you see? Okay. So I think you have received about a week ago through Harry's emails our invitation to collect examples of communication from your country's politician, like memes or slogans, quotes from speeches, and so on, like Francesca did. If you have some, you can share your example in the breakout group, or you can look for some example now, just opening the web and choosing what you want to work on. Please feel free to choose examples in your own language or in English from your country's politicians or from abroad, as you like. What we suggest you to do is try to focus on the words as directions of meanings, as constructs. So, for example, you may ask yourself about your example, what construct is involved or implied? What is the emergent pole and what is the opposite pole? If there is a metaphor or a superordinated construct involved, what are the implications of what is said and not said? What is fostered and what is excluded in the range of convenience of what the implied meanings? So, share your reflections in groups. If you want to choose a spokesperson for the next part, and we'll be back in plenary, I think in 30 or 40 minutes to share your group's reflections with everyone. Okay?
So we have now one Italian language group with 7 people, and the other ones are just mixed international groups as far as I read in the chat, right?
Thanks.
Chiara? I made the groups 35 minutes now.
Okay.
And we're counting down 60 seconds before closing. If you would like to, you should be able to move between the groups. So everybody should be able. I don't know if you know this possibility in Zoom to see.
I think
if you click on breakout room.
Yeah. Okay.
Then you should see if you are entered in one room. Then you should also see the other rooms and see the members in the rooms, and you can go to every group. And if you have the feeling, okay, we need more time, then you just come back to the main session and tell me that I prolong.
Okay,
I
thank you
will
very much.
at least try to do.
I go to the Italian room and then
Okay.
we'll see what to do.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Where is the Italian room? Sorry.
Roberta, are you
Yeah.
okay? Fine.
No, I think they put me in the wrong group. I belong to the Italian group, but I
Okay.
figure
So
out how to.
maybe I didn't see it. Wait, I will move you to the Italian group.
Okay, thank you.
Then you should just click OK. And Laura, what is with you? Can you hear now? Okay, obviously not. Jörn, can I help you? Oder kann ich dir helfen? Jetzt können wir auch Deutsch reden.
Ja, ich weiß nicht recht. I don't exactly know what to do now.
Also du müsstest eigentlich eine Einladung gekriegt haben, die bei dir aufgepoppt ist, dass du in den Breakout Room
Ja.
gehen kannst. Und wenn du das magst, also warte, lass mich schauen. Du bist mit Miroslav, Sally Robbins und Marcello Bandieras, klingt auch eher italienisch, aber in Raum 4. Dann könntest du da einfach OK drücken und dann wirst du quasi automatisch gebeamt in diesen Raum und kannst mit den dreien.
Wo muss ich OK drücken?
Also wenn bei dir nichts aufgegangen ist, in Zoom gibt es normalerweise ja unten diese Leiste.
Ja.
Und entweder da steht direkt Breakout Room oder du hast irgendwo 3 Punkte.
Breakout Session steht hier.
Ja, Breakout Session oder Breakout Session, genau.
Und da drücke ich jetzt mal drauf.
Genau.
Aha. Gut. Oh, 4.
Genau.
Breakout-Raum betreten.
Genau. Und wenn du da draufklickst, dann wirst du verschoben quasi. Gut.
Thanks, Jeanette.
Okay, 20 seconds and everybody will come back.
Okay, welcome back. So if you want to share with everybody your reflections, if there is any spokesperson, please, you're welcome. Who wants to start?
How many groups were there, Jeanette?
I think 6.
6 groups.
We didn't talk about a spokesperson. We should have done, but I wonder if, Patricia, if you'd like to say something about what we talked about.
Oh,
Yeah.
Harry, thank you for that vote as well. We got ourselves extraordinarily interested in the minutiae of language with 2 separate headlines. One was the government slogan, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives, as one, a very simple message that's going out. And the other one was one that I'd picked up from one of the left-wing papers here, which is a very simple extract from a speech from somebody talking about help parents. How was it, Viv? You wrote it down.
Yes, I did. Yes, help parents find a way to let their children exercise.
Yes, and so and we unpicked those in great detail, and the thing they had in common was that both the government exhortation and that simple, very nice hope that parents could help their children exercise left all the responsibility with the individual, the reader, the parent, or the person at home. And what it didn't do was allow for government protection of the public. So we just really examined the language in both of those, the implications for the person taking personal responsibility for public health and for children's health. One was very subtle, the newspaper one. The government warning was very crude, but both of them really led the reader, the person, the individual, to take responsibility and denied, if you like, the government responsibility for safety of the public, I think. Is that where we went, Viv?
I think it is, Patricia. Yes, thank you.
So another group wants to share.
Yeah.
So. Well, our little group, we talked about you know, this about sociality and about wanting to look after your own small group and care for them versus, you know, having a wider view of caring for others. And then we thought about the, you know, there's not accepting difference, this bipolar construing the them and us and the blame culture rather than accepting and embracing difference, and not being a kind of blaming culture. And then we thought about anticipation and thinking back about, you know, what have we learned from our history? What have we learned from the war? And, you know, I think people after the war, some people wanted to have this notion of citizens of the world. And so there, in terms of you know, working together and, you know, focusing on us as you know, as human beings, And then we thought wider to our environment, that the more that we cut down the Amazonian forests and the more that we don't care for our earth and the air we all breathe, you know, you can build a wall, but coronavirus is going to creep over the wall. So, you know, being respectful of the environment, because the more we interface with cutting down forests and animals and things that we're not aware of, like in the old days, you knew what mushrooms were edible and not. We don't know what we're kind of opening up. So it's kind of like, you know, more of respect all round, not only for persons, but for the environment that we live, and the fact that we, like fish, move through the air and we breathe it, and yet we're often not really aware of it. Anyway, I'll quit there. And Harry, unless you can help me out.
Well, we sort of we talked about how awful it is that there's so much blaming going on, didn't we? And ignoring, you know, one Tory politician just concentrating on the rights of people not to be told what to do by governments, completely ignoring, like in Francesca's example, not even mentioning the virus. So that was the sort of first part of our discussion. And then I was thinking, well, what does PCP itself or constructivism have to offer the political discourse? And I was thinking back to Sharon's friend, Don Bannister, who was actually quite, I mean, he wrote a couple of very good papers on politics and PCP, didn't he? And so what can PCP offer? Constructive alternativism, a respect for the wide variety of views and needs. We had Ekaterina in the group as well. It's a family therapist, in which, as when you're working with families, you're faced with very widely opposing views, and how can you somehow bring these together? And I think Mike Mascalo has, is Mike still around? Are you still there, Mike? I think he might not be there, but the idea of arbitrating between sharply conflicting positions. I must admit that in saying all that, we didn't feel hugely sort of optimistic that we could do much, but seems worth pursuing. Is there another group who would like to share?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. Because of course there is strong connections between what we, I think, understood through this experience of COVID, and not just the topic of this this workshop, but with things we have reflected on, I think, and also in PCP terms. So we must reflect more, I think, on what PCP can offer. Another group?
Okay. I try to share my desktop. Okay. We talk about okay. We got different politicians, and Lega is the one that use more memes to communicate, and this one is one of them. And what is written is about the priority of the government, that they say, is it coronavirus? No, they care about security. They don't care about security. So they bring the topic from coronavirus to another level, security, as if you cannot take both the topics in different moments, like or you talk about security, or you are not talking about the coronavirus. I don't know if I'm clear about that, but they bring communication on another level. So you have to choose. You want to mm, stop coronavirus and immigrants, or you want coronavirus and immigrants. Um, I don't know if I have to say something else, and I'm sorry for my English. Um, I don't know. Have you got some question to make it
I
more
just wanted
clear?
to check. Does this mean then conflate the two? That
Yes.
either you're, if you aren't looking after security, you're also letting coronavirus in. So you have to
Yeah.
do the two together. Is that the idea?
Yeah, the idea is that if you don't care about immigrants, you don't care about coronavirus. So
Right,
if
so
you
the two
let
are-
immigrants come, it means that you don't care about coronavirus, so you want
Right, because they're
coronavirus.
probably full of it,
Yeah.
as we would say in this country. So, right, okay, so it's a constellatory construction,
Yes, it is.
gluing the two
Yeah,
together.
yeah, blinking together.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
It's also using coronavirus to promote another agenda, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, that is the most important agenda for Lega.
Yeah. So
Yes, what is
one
in
of the
common?
things we talked about a little was Boris Johnson is now using coronavirus to promote the Brexit agenda, because
Yes.
Britain is triumphant again, is vaccinating more people than any other country apart from Israel. It's the
It's
first
the
country
same.
to approve a vaccine. Therefore, Brexit has been a great success. Whereas in reality, the majority of people know it's a disaster. So it's a clear case, I think, of Kellyan hostility. And we talk quite a lot about politicians' communications as involving hostility. We obviously talked about Trump as well. And regardless of the situation, coronavirus isn't particularly special in that regard. I think politicians always using the same sort of strategies.
Yes, I think that the structure of discourse is the same. And the strategy is to put fear among people and to say, we have able to protect you. The others are enemy. And the others and the virus are in some way the same thing. And I think also that threat and try to put fear among people is a very, very powerful tool for the power, for the political power. If you are threatened, you would be controlled. I think also that it is interesting in these memes to try to understand what is not what is avoided, constriction about what they are not saying to us. That is, I think, very, very important to understand what they are putting out of the discourse, what is the focus and what is outside the focus. And after I can shut up myself, and I think that PCP, it is a very, very powerful theory in terms to understand, to describe not only meanings, but also processes that in some way are involved in this way to create some sort of realities.
I'd like to second that. I mean, I was very impressed by the use of PCP that you three gave for looking at issues of power and discourse. I mean, you know, we've arisen from psychotherapy in which we're thinking about the meaning systems of small groups or individuals, but I don't think I've ever seen such a clear use of PCP tools and concepts to throw light on how political power is exercised. I thought that was very important.
Not only in small groups, but to
In
society.
Macro, yeah.
Yeah, I agree as well.
I'm very grateful for that.
I would encourage you all to write this up. I thought it was deeply clear. The examples were wonderful, and the Kellian interpretations were very clear. I think it's very helpful.
Yeah.
I wondered also if it's worth. I mean, I was thinking a lot about what you've done methodologically, and thinking that it bears a lot of resemblance to what, you know, constructionists usually refer to as discourse analysis. Yeah. So it seemed to me a form of discourse analysis, the particular kind of take to it, a Kellian take. And I wondered if, I mean, certainly, and I would agree with Mike. I think I would like to see this written up and published, and maybe some attention giving to how how a PCP approach to doing this kind of discursive work can add something of value to discourse analysis.
I think so.
By bringing personal experience back into it. Yeah. More than that.
I'd like to comment if I can. I want to share my screen. I mean, so many thoughts came to my mind when the discussion was going up. I couldn't help but try to write some stuff down, especially with respect to the following. I mean, how can PCP inform the process by which we can break down the divisions between people? And what came to my mind was something like this. You know, in the States, we got people who don't want to wear masks a lot. And we have people who do want to wear masks. And the way that people in the States tend to justify the no mask position is with a construct like freedom versus police state. We want freedom. We have the freedom. Don't tell us what to do, you police state. We have our freedom. We don't have to wear masks. And then the people who are wearing masks say, hey, we have the state has to protect us. And they should say people should wear masks. And the people who don't wear masks are being irresponsible. And so that this construct is incompatible, is conflicting with this construct. I think that where PCP can be helpful is right here in these diagonals. That if we take this diagonal, how can we break down these two constructs and coordinate them, if you will, into, okay, one side wants protection and the other side wants freedom. Can we respect both of these, you know, without the negatives, police state and irresponsibility, getting rid of that blame that people were talking about? How can we respect the people who say we want freedom, as distasteful as that might be to some people? And how can we respect the people who say we want protection? And now we got a new construct, or at least building blocks for ways to bring these together. I think PCP can add something through this analysis like this.
I think you're right. You're right, because it seemed to me a good example of where, you know, if this were a person in a therapeutic context, what you'd be trying to find is some sort of orthogonal construct that didn't imply those two extremes.
Yes.
Finding something that was orthogonal to those constructs that everybody could sign up to.
Mm-hmm. That would be my goal.
Yeah, Michael, and I think that we are faced with two philosophical or two different meanings of the word freedom and the construction of freedom. Freedom by and freedom of. And we have to reflect on this and to perhaps enter deeply into this kind of meanings, because I think that they are at the heart of this problem. When freedom is be free from someone or something, or be free of doing something. And the first, if we focus on the first meaning, obviously the others are obstacles to my freedom. And if we focus on the second kind of meaning, everything completely changes.
I agree.
We actually, oh, sorry. In our group, we spent quite a lot of time thinking about this mask business, because Mirek had been noticing what it meant to wear a mask in different countries, particularly what it meant last March. And then we were talking about some of the ways that that has changed. And I think that observation, particularly different places, different cultural groups, another of his example was city versus village, and the different, what it meant to wear a mask or not to wear a mask there. I think those kind of perspectives could add to that discussion and to those ideas about how you can find ways of communicating and diffusing that that very wide contrast.
If Sarah wants to tell aloud what she's writing down in the chat, please. It's a great contribution.
Just that I think in South Africa, the meaning ascribed to mask wearing is a lot about solidarity and protecting the people around you. There are some people speaking about freedom, and it's a particular people aligned with a particular opposition party who are more liberalist. But overall, the idea is that it's solidarity and we're protecting each other and we're caring for each other. In our group discussion, it was interesting that the government is speaking a lot about solidarity on the international stage and with vaccines, and perhaps constricting and not looking at how the same party has stolen and has abused the funds, so that is hiding there's another political force or a commission speaking around corruption, state capture and state corruption, a lot associated with COVID. But so I think a lot is wallpapered. The solidarity discourse is a strong one and is used right across, but it's also hiding other discussions about blame and that the government hasn't taken responsibility to use the funds wisely. But it's a slightly different feel.
Thank you.
When Sharon talked about citizenship of the world, that I really pricked my ears up. I mean, I was the product of two parents whose countries had been at war shortly before my birth. being half English, half German. And the whole feel of my childhood was against nationalism, basically, part of the international village sort of thing, the global village. And that's sort of, people tend to sort of just be rather cynical about that concept nowadays, don't they? And there seems to have been a resurgence of the nation state, Brexit being a good example of that. And I was asking in our group, is there anyone who's actually talking that language particularly? One doesn't hear the voices of humanity. You do indirectly through the environmental movement, in that the environment affects everybody, but nobody's really talking about the fact that we're all human beings and that that's the most important thing, and that where we come from or what the color of our skin is, etc., is entirely secondary. I always remember my parents, you know, because the United Nations was a big thing in my childhood, and one knew who what's the name of the person who heads up the United Nations? I've forgotten the role title.
Secretary General, Harry.
Sorry?
The Secretary General, I think.
The Secretary General, yeah. We used to hear the words, the names, Uthant and people like that. And those sort of people, their voices don't seem to be heard nowadays, unless I'm just looking in the wrong place.
Well, we talked in our group about how, in fact, it's been backwards, that nationalism and COVID have become intertwined almost. So we're having the vaccine first, thank you, and sod everybody else. And that seems to have been reflected in a lot of different countries, that almost that panic about, hang on, we want it first.
Sorry, Peter, is your sound good? Did you finish?
No, I finished. I just,
okay. Yeah.
There's that sense of, I mean, another example would be in Australia, where it suddenly became a set of states and they shut the borders to each other, to everybody. This hasn't happened in 100 years, but suddenly it was states, not Australia. And that COVID has highlighted some of those divisions rather than becoming solidarity. How does one become solid or solidarity in Sarah's terms?
Well, thanks, Sarah. Ramaphosa is presumably the Secretary General, is he or she?
The President.
President of South Africa at the moment. Actually, this was, in September, not this week. But yeah, pushing. It's a message he's been having across in a number of discussions.
Yeah.
The World Health Organization are trying to press across that point. And I was at a seminar with Mike Ryan, who's one of the people in charge of the vaccines and of looking at dealing with the world pandemic. But he was pointing out that if we don't vaccinate, everybody in the world or bring it around to all the countries, that all the vaccination in the West will come to naught, because it'll just spread again. A new variant will just start and spread again. So that even it's within our own self-interest to be more generous about it, rather than necessarily otherwise.
So caring for others means also doing your own interests, and because we are connected, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
so sad that we have to argue for something, find a way of arguing on the basis of self-interest rather than interest for the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. It's a very interesting debate. If there is someone who wants to say something more from the groups or not.
I want to add something. I'm thinking, hearing your what you are saying, that maybe there are two really subordinate constructs to these discourses. One is a security versus uncertainty, and it is a sort of thread in these argumentations. And the other one is us versus others. There is a sort of separation, and it is common. These two constructs maybe are common.
I would just like to add to what everybody has said, that it felt to me like underneath all of these texts that we've been analysing is a kind of fundamental assumption of liberal humanism that places responsibility for well-being with the individual, and where governments are, I mean, I think in certainly in the things that we looked at in our group, any responsibility that the government may have for that well-being is excluded from the discourse, and it's absent. So it felt to me very much that running through many of these things was a sort of an assumption of liberal humanism, assumption about how you achieve the good life, I guess.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be great if we could bring a discussion of the good life back into public discourse? In the States, we don't talk about it. We just talk about who's responsible and who's to blame.
But you have got a very interesting scenario now, Mike, in terms of Trump versus Biden, and what can a government do in terms of acting on the virus? It's almost like an experimental setup. You've had 4 years of Trump. Now let's see what 4 years of intervention does.
Well, one of our root metaphors is the person is a scientist, isn't it? And we know that there are good scientists and not such good scientists. I was asking in our group, to what extent has all the debates about science and the very impressive contribution of science at many levels in this pandemic, to what extent has that helped people to understand science a little bit better? If you think of the statistics that we're offered every day, is somehow the population getting a bit more sophisticated about understanding how you measure macro events? I don't know.
Don't know, Harry. It seems to me that it is not so easy, because sometimes it is difficult to keep all the complexities in sight. You know, normal people try to sort out 4, 3, 4, 5 simple construct, and this phenomenon is really complex. And what I see is that sometimes, or very often, people try to look for simple information to draw conclusion easier than always, perhaps. And even if scientists try to share the idea that science is a progress, science is always verifying and falsifying itself and going on in this way. As Massimo said before, there's a superordinate construct: certainty, uncertainty. People want certainty.
And it seems apparently that politics and politicians, politics communications try to simplify, try to make it easier to people to understand, but it's a choice to do this. So so it's a way to use power, of course. I think
Strikes
that
me. Oh, sorry.
Go, please, Sally.
Strikes me that one of the things that's relevant here is how advertising works. And that's often very simple, isn't it? Very catchy, and within television in particular, and I think some of the social media, short sound bites. And so I think we have had growing that kind of way of taking in information, and the move to internet information, rather than in England sitting down and watching the whole of a kind of documentary in a worthy sort of way. So I think that whole cultural change then predisposes towards simple, soundbitey meme, and therefore, to some extent, inauthentic and simplistic and possibly even inaccurate communication.
Yes, I think it has an impact. Of course, sometimes we are just catch by highlights and nothing more than that. So this is interesting, but also risky. I think we have just a few minutes, Harry, right?
Yeah.
Someone has to go.
Well, shall we bring it to a close now, the discussion? I mean, I've been very struck by the seriousness of the feelings that this session has brought. And I think that's a very good thing. And I think it's allowed us as a group to confront some realities that quite a lot of the time we find various ways of just avoiding, really. And many of our sessions have had rather a jocular sort of atmosphere about them, but I was feeling quite, don't know what the word is quite, but during Massimo and Francesca's part of it, particularly looking at the awful thinking of these political parties. But anyway, I would just like to thank everybody. Thank the three of you again, Massimo, Chiara and Francesca, for a very thought-provoking and interesting presentation. And as I say, I don't think I've come across a more impressive use of PCP for looking at such a sort of macro situation before. So I'd like to congratulate you for that. And as Mike says, look forward to reading your series of papers that comes from this. So thanks on behalf of everybody.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you to everyone. It was very interesting and really, really deep for me. And I sent my introduction. I think that also Francesca did the same. And if you like to read it, And I hope to see you again for other occasions like this.
Yeah.
And
I was going to say that, you know, it's been great to have more Italians with us today than we've had before. And I would appeal to you to continue to attend future sessions. I know that the day of the week's been difficult, but if we do a second series, then maybe we'll move to a Saturday, as Massimo suggests.
Maybe
of course,
it's
then
better.
you're going to get a different thing. You're going to get, oh, this is family time, but be interesting to see which one gets the bigger audience.
Okay, thanks also to Harry and other organizers
Yes.
to have offered this thread, this occasion to stay in touch each other. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you for your effort. Thank you.
Yeah.
See you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye bye. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Ciao Viv.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao Jorn.
Ciao.
Ciao David. Ciao a tutti.
Bye bye, friends.
Bye.
Ciao.
Arrivederci.
Bye bye.
Bye.
So nice to see you. Jorn,
Great to see you.
David, Harry. Thank
Really
you.
lovely to see you.
So keep in touch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye,
you,
Karen.
Jeanette.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Really helpful.
And great to see you.
Thanks.
How have you been?
Oh, more or less fine.
Yeah.
So wait, I stopped the recording. I hope this
No,
was
it's still going. The
because-
recording's still going.
Yeah, because Mike left, so I hope.
Oh.